When the night sky over Iran lit up with fire, the world held its breath. In one of the most daring military strikes of the 21st century, Israel unleashed a storm, jet fighters, drones, and missiles, all aimed at the heart of Iran's nuclear ambitions. But this was not just an act of war, it was a message, decades in the making, a message written in blood, fear, and history. Why now? Who struck first? And are we watching the birth of a new Middle Eastern war, or the first flames of something far bigger? This is the Griot Chronicles. Welcome back to the Griot Chronicles, where we don't just tell stories, we uncover the threads that weave through history to create the tapestries of today's headlines. I'm your host, and if this deep dive into one of the world's most explosive conflicts captivates you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Because today, we're not just discussing current events, we're exploring how ancient grudges can ignite modern wars, and why understanding history isn't just academic luxury, it's survival necessity. On June 13, 2025, the world watched as the State of Israel launched one of the most daring military operations in its history. The name? Operation Rising Lion. But behind the sleek name and surgical strikes lies a war rooted in deep history, in nuclear fear, in national pride, and in the ghosts of past betrayals. According to Israeli intelligence, Iran was nearing completion of a nuclear weapons program, despite decades of international pressure and monitoring by the IAEA. The threshold had been crossed. Uranium enrichment at 60%, weaponization trials, ballistic missile integration. Netanyahu's government viewed it not as a future threat, but a present danger. Diplomacy had failed. Sanctions had been shrugged off. Words, Israel claimed, no longer protected its people. Operation Rising Lion was the result. A colossal air campaign involving over 200 fighter jets, drones, and electronic warfare systems, striking more than 100 strategic targets across Iran. Nuclear facilities like Natanz and Isfahan, IRGC command centers, missile stockpiles, anti-aircraft systems. Even the homes of top military and nuclear officials were reduced to rubble. The result? Devastating. Iranian state media confirmed at least 78 dead, including some of the nation's most powerful military minds. General Hossein Salami of the Revolutionary Guard, Chief of Staff Mohammad Bagheri, and at least 6 nuclear scientists. Over 320 people were injured, many of them civilians caught in the storm. But Iran did not wait long to respond. Just hours after the Israeli jets vanished into the night sky, Tehran retaliated with fury. A torrent of over 100 ballistic missiles and hundreds of drones were unleashed towards Israeli cities. Sirens screamed in Tel Aviv. Explosions rocked Rishon LeZion. Civilian homes shattered. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iran's elite military force, had clearly been preparing for this moment, and their response demonstrated both the sophistication of their arsenal and their willingness to escalate beyond the controlled proxy conflicts that had characterized this rivalry for decades. Israeli cities from Haifa in the north to Beersheba in the south found themselves under attack. The Iron Dome missile defense system, often praised as nearly impenetrable, was overwhelmed by the sheer volume of incoming projectiles. While it successfully intercepted many missiles, some got through, and the results were tragic and immediate. At least 3 Israeli civilians died in the initial barrage, with dozens more wounded. The psychological impact was perhaps even more significant than the physical damage. For the first time in decades, ordinary Israelis faced the reality of direct attack from their most formidable regional adversary. The human cost of this escalation extends far beyond the immediate casualties. In Israel, schools closed across the country not for a day or two, but indefinitely. The famous Tel Aviv Pride Parade, scheduled for that weekend and typically attracting hundreds of thousands of participants, was cancelled. Supermarkets saw panic buying as families stocked up on water, canned goods, and medical supplies. The psychological warfare was as effective as the kinetic warfare life in Israel, ground to a halt, as the population braced for what many feared could be the beginning of a wider regional war. In Iran, the response was different but equally telling. State television showed massive crowds gathering in city squares, chanting "Death to Israel" and burning Israeli flags. But behind this display of national unity, there were signs of deep concern. Reports emerged of wealthy Iranians attempting to transfer assets out of the country, of government officials sending their families to neutral nations, and of ordinary citizens expressing private fears about what might come next. The international reaction was swift and deeply concerned. Stock markets in Asia opened to significant losses as investors fled to safe haven assets. Oil prices spiked dramatically as traders calculated the potential impact on Middle Eastern production and shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. The European Union called for immediate de-escalation, while Russia and China issued statements supporting Iran's right to defend itself. The United States found itself in the particularly delicate position of supporting its ally Israel, while simultaneously trying to prevent a wider regional war that could draw in American forces. What makes this escalation particularly dangerous is that it represents a fundamental shift in the nature of Israeli-Iranian conflict. For over 4 decades, these two nations have fought what intelligence analysts call a shadow war, a complex dance of proxy conflicts, covert operations, cyber attacks, and targeted assassinations that allowed both sides to inflict damage on each other while maintaining plausible deniability and avoiding direct confrontation. The events of June 2025 shattered that paradigm, bringing the conflict into the harsh light of direct military engagement. But to understand why this happened now, why these particular red lines were crossed, we need to journey back through the labyrinthine history of Israeli-Iranian relations. This story doesn't begin with ayatollahs and rabbis glaring at each other across ancient grudges. Ironically, it begins with friendship, cooperation, and shared strategic interests that seem almost impossible to imagine given today's realities. Before 1979, Iran under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and Israel were not just diplomatic partners, they were strategic allies in a dangerous neighborhood. Both nations saw themselves as non-Arab powers in a predominantly Arab region. Both faced hostile neighbors, and both relied heavily on Western support, particularly from the United States. The relationship was so close that Israel provided military training to Iranian forces, Iran supplied oil to Israel during the Arab oil embargoes, and the two countries cooperated on intelligence matters throughout the region. This partnership wasn't just about convenience, it was about survival. Israel, surrounded by Arab nations that refused to recognize its existence, desperately needed regional allies. Iran, facing Soviet pressure from the north and Arab nationalism from the west, saw Israel as a valuable partner in maintaining regional balance. The Shah, despite presiding over a majority Muslim nation, maintained that Iran's ancient Persian heritage and Shia identity made it natural allies with the Jewish state against Sunni Arab nationalism. The transformation began on February 11, 1979, when the Iranian Revolution culminated in the overthrow of the Shah and the establishment of the Islamic Republic under Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. This wasn't just a change of government, it was a complete reimagining of Iran's identity, its relationship with the West, and its role in the Middle East. Khomeini's revolutionary ideology viewed Israel not just as a regional competitor, but as an illegitimate entity that had no right to exist on what he considered Muslim land. The new Iranian leadership adopted what became known as the resistance doctrine, the belief that Israel represented a cancer in the heart of the Islamic world that needed to be excised. This wasn't merely political rhetoric, it became the cornerstone of Iranian foreign policy. The Islamic Republic began providing financial support, weapons and training to any group willing to fight against Israeli interests, from Palestinian militants in the occupied territories to Shia militias in Lebanon. The creation and support of Hezbollah in Lebanon represents perhaps the most successful example of this strategy. Following Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982, Iranian Revolutionary Guards established training camps in the Bekaa Valley and began organizing Lebanese Shia communities into what would become one of the world's most formidable non-state military organizations. Hezbollah, literally meaning Party of God, became Iran's primary proxy in its conflict with Israel, allowing Tehran to wage war against the Jewish state without directly confronting Israeli military might. But Hezbollah was just the beginning. Iran's network of proxy relationships expanded throughout the region, creating what Iranian strategists called the axis of resistance. This network included not just Hezbollah in Lebanon, but Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, various Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Each of these groups maintained their own local agendas and grievances, but all received Iranian support and coordination in their conflicts with Israel and its allies. The proxy war strategy served both sides' interests for decades. Iran could inflict damage on Israeli interests and maintain pressure on the Jewish state, without risking direct military confrontation with a superior air force and nuclear-armed opponent. Israel, meanwhile, could respond to proxy attacks without triggering a wider regional war that might draw in other powers or threaten its existence. This created what strategists called a stable instability, constant low-level conflict that never quite escalated to existential war. The nuclear dimension added another layer of complexity to this relationship. Iran's nuclear program, which began under the Shah with American and European assistance, took on sinister implications after 1979. Israeli intelligence agencies became convinced that the Islamic Republic was using its civilian nuclear program as cover for weapons development, creating what Israeli leaders described as an existential threat to the Jewish state. This concern wasn't merely theoretical. Iranian leaders regularly made statements about wiping Israel off the map, denied the Holocaust, and supported groups actively engaged in terrorism against Israeli civilians. When combined with a potential nuclear capability, these threats took on immediate urgency for Israeli strategic planners. The result was a decades-long campaign of sabotage, assassination, and diplomatic pressure designed to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. The campaign included some of the most sophisticated covert operations in modern intelligence history. The Stuxnet computer virus, widely attributed to joint Israeli-American development, physically destroyed Iranian centrifuges by causing them to spin out of control while reporting normal operations to monitoring systems. Israeli agents assassinated Iranian nuclear scientists in broad daylight on Tehran's streets. Explosions mysteriously occurred at Iranian nuclear facilities with suspicious regularity. Each incident denied by Israel, but clearly part of a coordinated campaign to prevent Iranian nuclear capability. Iran responded in kind, targeting Israeli diplomats, tourists, and citizens around the world. Iranian agents planted bombs at Israeli embassies in India and Georgia, planned attacks against Israeli tourists in Thailand and Bulgaria, and supported terrorist operations in Europe and South America. The shadow war had gone global, with both sides striking at each other's interests wherever they found opportunity. The Syrian civil war, beginning in 2011, provided a new theater for this proxy conflict. Iran deployed Revolutionary Guards and Hezbollah fighters to support the Assad government, while Israel conducted hundreds of airstrikes against Iranian and Hezbollah positions in Syria. These operations, known as the War Between Wars, allowed Israel to prevent Iran from establishing a permanent military presence on its northern border while avoiding direct confrontation with Iranian forces. But the strategy that had worked for decades began showing signs of strain in recent years. Iran's proxy network was becoming more sophisticated and aggressive. Hezbollah had evolved from a guerrilla movement into a military force with over 100,000 rockets and missiles pointed at Israeli cities. Hamas had developed long-range rockets capable of reaching Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Iranian-backed militias in Iraq were launching drones against Israeli targets with increasing frequency and accuracy. Meanwhile, the diplomatic landscape was shifting in ways that made the old proxy war model less sustainable. The Abraham Accords, normalizing relations between Israel and several Arab nations, had reduced Iran's ability to present itself as the champion of Muslim resistance against Israeli occupation. The assassination of Iranian nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh in 2020, widely attributed to Israel, had created domestic pressure within Iran for more direct retaliation. The collapse of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear deal with world powers, had removed diplomatic constraints on both sides. Regional developments were also creating new pressures. The war in Ukraine had demonstrated both the limitations of conventional deterrence and the effectiveness of precision strikes against critical infrastructure. Iranian support for Russia in that conflict had created new points of friction with Western powers and Israel. The growing cooperation between Iran, China, and Russia was shifting regional power balances in ways that made both Israel and the United States more concerned about Iranian capabilities and intentions. The specific intelligence that triggered Operation Rising Lion remains classified, but sources suggest Israeli leaders became convinced that Iran was on the verge of a major breakthrough in its nuclear program. Satellite imagery reportedly showed unusual activity at Iranian nuclear facilities, while electronic intelligence suggested preparations for moving nuclear material to previously unknown locations. The assessment of Israeli military planners was that the window for preventing Iranian nuclear capability was rapidly closing. The decision to strike represented a fundamental gamble by Israeli leadership. By abandoning the proxy war model and directly attacking Iranian territory, Israel was betting that it could inflict sufficient damage to set back Iranian nuclear and military capabilities, while avoiding the wider regional war that had been the primary argument for restraint. The calculation was that Iran, despite its threats and rhetoric, would ultimately choose tactical retaliation over strategic escalation. This gamble was based on several assumptions about Iranian behavior and capabilities. Israeli planners believed that Iran's military, while formidable in proxy warfare, was not prepared for direct confrontation with Israeli air power. They calculated that Iranian leadership, despite revolutionary rhetoric, was ultimately rational and would not risk the Islamic Republic's survival. Most importantly, they believed demonstrating Israeli capability would strengthen deterrence and reduce long-term risks. The Iranian response with Operation Severe Punishment suggested that at least some of these calculations were wrong. Rather than accepting Israeli escalation, Iran chose direct retaliation that fundamentally changed the conflict's nature. The missile barrage was not just military action, it was political communication, demonstrating Iranian capability and resolve. It signaled that the old rules of engagement no longer applied. The name chosen for the Iranian operation, Severe Punishment, carried deep cultural and religious significance. This may have been lost on Western observers, but resonated powerfully in the Islamic world. In Islamic jurisprudence, severe punishment is divine justice, restoring moral balance disturbed by aggression. Perhaps most significantly, the escalation has forced the United States into an uncomfortable position. As Israel's primary ally and security guarantor, America is expected to support Israeli actions while simultaneously working to prevent regional war that could draw in American forces. The Chinese and Russian responses have added additional complexity to the situation. Both nations have significant relationships with Iran and have used the crisis to criticize American and Israeli policies in the region. China's call for immediate ceasefire and peaceful resolution of differences was accompanied by subtle criticism of what it called unilateral military actions, clearly referring to Israeli strikes. Russia's more direct support for Iranian positions reflected both its strategic partnership with Tehran and its broader confrontation with Western powers. European responses have been more unified in calling for de-escalation, but European Union statements have also reflected the complexity of member state relationships with both combatants. France, with its historical ties to Lebanon and concerns about Hezbollah activities, has been particularly active in diplomatic efforts. Germany, with its special relationship with Israel based on Holocaust remembrance, has found itself torn between supporting Israeli security needs and preventing regional war. The military lessons emerging from both operations are already being studied by defense establishments worldwide. The Israeli strikes demonstrated the continued relevance of air power in modern warfare, but also the challenges of conducting complex operations across multiple sovereign airspaces against sophisticated defenses. The Iranian response showed both the potential and limitations of missile-based retaliation, overwhelming some defenses while being limited by accuracy and intelligence capabilities. The intelligence dimensions of the conflict have been equally revealing. The Israeli ability to target specific facilities and individuals suggests remarkable penetration of Iranian security systems and decision-making processes. The Iranian ability to coordinate such a massive retaliation so quickly suggests equally sophisticated intelligence and operational capabilities. Both sides have demonstrated capabilities that were not fully appreciated by outside observers. The cyber dimensions of the conflict, while less visible than kinetic operations, have been equally significant. Reports suggest that both sides have engaged in extensive cyber warfare alongside their physical military operations, targeting critical infrastructure, communication systems, and command and control networks. These cyber operations may prove to have longer-lasting effects than the immediate military strikes. The propaganda and information warfare aspects of the conflict have been as sophisticated as the military operations. Both sides have worked to control narratives, influence international opinion, and maintain domestic support for their actions. Iranian media has emphasized civilian casualties and Israeli aggression, while Israeli sources have focused on the defensive nature of their actions and Iranian threats to regional stability. Social media has become a battlefield as active as physical terrain. The religious and cultural dimensions of the conflict add layers of complexity that purely strategic analysis often misses. For many Iranians, resistance to Israel is not just political strategy, but religious obligation, part of a broader struggle between Islamic civilization and Western imperialism. For many Israelis, the conflict with Iran represents an existential threat to Jewish survival, echoing historical persecutions and the Holocaust. These deeper cultural narratives make the conflict particularly resistant to traditional diplomatic solutions. The economic dimensions of the conflict extend far beyond immediate military costs. Both nations are spending enormous resources on military capabilities, proxy relationships, and intelligence operations that could otherwise be invested in development and social programs. The broader region suffers from instability that discourages investment and development. The global economy bears costs through higher energy prices, increased security expenditures, and disrupted trade relationships. Looking forward, the events of June 2025 represent a potential turning point in Middle Eastern geopolitics. The old model of proxy warfare and plausible deniability has been shattered, replaced by direct military confrontation between regional powers. The implications of this shift will reverberate through regional relationships, global energy markets, and international security calculations for years to come. The immediate question facing policymakers in Tehran, Jerusalem, Washington, and other capitals is whether this escalation can be contained or whether it represents the beginning of a wider regional war. Both Israel and Iran have demonstrated capabilities that were not fully appreciated by outside observers, but both have also shown restraint that suggests neither side wants unlimited escalation. The challenge for diplomats is finding face-saving ways for both sides to step back from the brink while addressing the underlying issues that created this crisis. The broader question is whether the Middle East is entering a new era of direct confrontation between regional powers, replacing the proxy conflicts and diplomatic maneuvering that have characterized the region since the end of the Cold War. The events of June 2025 may be remembered as the moment when the shadow war between Israel and Iran finally stepped into the light, with consequences that extend far beyond the immediate combatants. As we watch these events unfold from our vantage point here at the Griot Chronicles, we're reminded that history doesn't just happen to other people in other times. It's being written right now, in real time, by decisions made in crisis moments like these. The ancient grudges between peoples and nations don't stay buried in the past. They emerge in new forms, with new weapons, but often driven by the same fundamental fears and aspirations that have driven human conflict for millennia. This is why we do what we do here at the Griot Chronicles. Because understanding the historical threads that weave through current events isn't just academic exercise, it's essential preparation for the world we're all living in. If you found this analysis helpful, if it's given you new ways to think about these complex issues, then please subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you the deep historical context that mainstream news often misses. The story of Israel and Iran is far from over. In fact, what we've witnessed in June 2025 may be just the beginning of a new chapter in their 4-decade rivalry. As events continue to unfold, we'll be here to help you understand not just what's happening, but why it's happening, and what it might mean for all of us. Because in our interconnected world, conflicts that seem distant and foreign have ways of touching all our lives, whether through energy prices, global security, or the simple recognition that we all share this small planet. Until next time, this has been the Griot Chronicles, where history lives, breathes, and helps us understand the world we are creating together. Stay curious, stay informed, and remember, the stories of today become the history of tomorrow.